The Veil did not send soldiers to deliver ultimatums. They sent singers. Across 14 star systems and 9 sovereign civilizations, this was considered the most terrifying thing about them. When the Veil decided a species had outlived its diplomatic usefulness, they dispatched a choir, 7 individuals whose vocal cords had been surgically altered over decades of ritualistic modification, capable of producing resonance frequencies that could liquefy bone marrow at close range, collapse atmospheric membranes at medium range, and in their most perfected form, destabilize the crystalline lattice of a planet's mantle at long range. They called this gift Threnody. They had used it 4 times in recorded history. 4 times, a world had cracked open from the inside like an egg held too close to a fire. For civilizations had learned, too late, that the singing was not a warning. The singing was already the ending. Commander Yessa Vorn of the Veil Convergence Fleet stood at the observation deck of the Sovereign Hymn and looked at the 3rd planet orbiting the pale yellow star the primitives called Sol. It was unremarkable. Blue-green. Swirled with white. The kind of world the Veil catalogued as Category 12, biologically dense, technologically adolescent, and politically fragmented. Right. They've been transmitting again, said Subcommander Leth. His nasal slits flared with the particular anxiety he reserved for things he found distasteful but professionally necessary. Leth was 6 feet tall, covered in the fine bioluminescent scales that marked him as highborn Veil. His 4 eyes, each capable of independent focus across different light spectrums. He was, by any objective measure, a magnificent creature. He was also deeply uncomfortable about this assignment. What are they transmitting? Yessa asked without turning. The same individual. The one they designated as their special diplomatic liaison to extraterrestrial affairs. Leth paused. He's been transmitting for 11 hours. What is he saying? Leth was quiet for a moment. His bioluminescence flickered, the Veil equivalent of a wince. He's telling jokes. Yessa turned around. He's telling jokes, Leth repeated, as though saying it twice might make it make more sense. They appear to be structured narratives designed to produce involuntary respiratory convulsions in the listener. Humor. The transmission includes a cultural context file. He's been sitting in front of a camera for 11 hours telling jokes and occasionally stopping to eat a food item he refers to as a, Leth consulted his data filament, a sandwich. Yessa stared at her subcommander for a long moment. Pull up the transmission, she said. The man on the screen was not what Yessa had expected. She had studied humans extensively in the 6 months since the Convergence Fleet had entered the outer edges of the Sol system. She understood their biology, fragile, warm-blooded, bilaterally symmetrical, and embarrassingly soft without their technology. She understood their history, violent, contradictory, and periodically self-destructive in ways that bordered on artistic. She understood their geopolitics, fractured into hundreds of competing nation-states that had, improbably, managed to not annihilate themselves for nearly a century. She had expected, when humanity was finally informed of the Veil's intentions, to receive a transmission featuring military commanders, heads of state, generals in dress uniforms reading carefully prepared statements about humanity's willingness to defend itself. Instead she got Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was 43 years old. He had the slightly rumpled appearance of a man who had slept in his clothes, which he had because he'd been in the transmission suite for 11 hours. He had brown hair that was losing its argument with gravity. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was currently eating what the cultural context file confirmed was a turkey sandwich on sourdough bread. He was also undeniably funny. Yessa did not want to find him funny. She found him funny anyway. She had activated the translation matrix 20 minutes into his transmission and had spent the subsequent time watching Marcus Webb explain, with great seriousness and an extraordinarily deadpan expression, why humans had decided that the best response to an alien ultimatum was to send him specifically. See, here's the thing about Earth's diplomatic corps, Marcus said, taking a bite of his sandwich and chewing thoughtfully. We have a lot of very qualified, very serious people. Ambassadors. Generals. People who have spent 30 years learning how to negotiate in rooms where everyone is trying to stab everyone else with a metaphorical knife. And those people are amazing. They really are. We're very proud of them. He paused. We didn't send any of them. He looked directly into the camera with an expression of absolute sincerity. We sent me. And I want to be transparent about why, because I think honesty is important when one civilization is threatening to crack your planet open like an egg. He took another bite of his sandwich. I'm here because I'm the only person on Earth's diplomatic council who, when the vote was taken on how to respond to your ultimatum, said, and I quote, I don't think they're serious. And everyone looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And maybe I have. But I've been watching your transmissions for 6 months and I've noticed something. He leaned forward. You haven't done anything yet. Yes's 4 eyes focused on him simultaneously, which was something that happened involuntarily when she was paying very close attention. You've been out there for 6 months, Marcus continued, gesturing vaguely upward in the direction of space. 6 months of ultimatums. 6 months of submit or be destroyed. 6 months of very impressive light shows on the edge of our solar system. And I've been sitting here in this room eating sandwiches and I've started to wonder. He paused, took a sip of coffee from a ceramic mug that said world's okayest diplomat. What are you waiting for? The transmission suite was hushed. Because here's what I know about Earth, Marcus said, setting down his coffee. When we're actually scared, we don't make speeches. We dig. We build. We arm ourselves and we start planning very complicated, very ugly contingencies. I've got colleagues right now in bunkers under mountains doing exactly that. They're not sleeping. They're not eating sandwiches. He held up his sandwich. That's just me. He smiled. It was, yes, a thought, a smile that had something strange behind it. Not bravado. Not performance. Something quieter and more unsettling. I'm eating sandwiches, Marcus Webb said, because I think you're scared too. And I think we should talk about that. Yessa stared at the screen for a long time after the transmission ended. Sup, Commander, she said quietly. Yes, Commander? Open a channel. The first conversation between Yessa Vorn and Marcus Webb lasted 9 hours. This was unprecedented in the history of Veil diplomacy. The Veil did not negotiate. They announced. They declared. They sang when necessary, and their singing permanently ended arguments. The concept of a 9-hour conversation with a Category 12 primitive was so far outside normal operational parameters that Leth spent the first 3 hours standing at the back of the communications suite with the expression of someone watching a building slowly fall in a direction buildings were not supposed to fall. Marcus Webb, for his part, treated it like a Tuesday. Okay, he said early in the conversation after Yessa had explained, in the clipped, formal register of the Veil Convergence's diplomatic protocol, the terms of humanity's submission. I heard all of that. I really did. And I want to respond to it seriously because I think you deserve a serious response. He paused. Can I ask you something first? You may attempt a question, Yessa said. The 4 worlds you mentioned. The ones the choir, that's a terrifying name by the way. I want to acknowledge that, the ones the choir destroyed. What did those civilizations do? Like, specifically, what was the actual threat they posed? Yessa's bioluminescence flickered. His query was not a standard diplomatic question. The standard questions were about terms, timelines, and the logistics of submission protocols. Nobody asked about the reason. They refused integration into the convergence, she said. Right, but why did they refuse? Because they were unwilling to accept Veil governance structures. Sure. But were they actually a military threat to you? Pause. The Kethar were developing orbital weapons systems, Yessa said. Okay. The others? Another pause longer. The Morovan Collective was expanding beyond its designated sector boundaries. And the other 2? Yessa's 4 eyes shifted independently, a tell she was not aware she had. The Convergence Science Board classified the Duru's experiments as potentially unstable. And she stopped. And the 4th? Marcus pressed gently. The 4th, Yessa said carefully, refused to respond to our communications. Marcus Webb was quiet for a moment. They just didn't answer, he said. They did not respond to 17 consecutive diplomatic transmissions over a period of 42 of their years. And you destroyed their planet. We could not allow that level of. Yessa stopped again. She was aware, with a clarity that was uncomfortable, that the word she was about to use was disrespect. She did not say it. Marcus seemed to understand anyway. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. I'm not going to make a speech about that, because I don't think that's what this conversation needs right now. I just want to verify that I understand the pattern. He picked up his coffee. What does the convergence actually want? Not the political answer. The real one. The convergence wants order, Yessa said. Stability. The guarantee that no emerging civilization will develop to a point where it constitutes an unmanageable variable in galactic political systems. An unmanageable variable, Marcus repeated slowly. You mean you want to make sure nobody ever gets powerful enough to threaten you? We want to ensure. That's what it is though, Marcus said. Not accusatory. Quiet. Almost gentle. 600 years of building the convergence. 14 star systems. 9 civilizations brought under your governance. 4 worlds destroyed. And all of it is about making sure that what happened to you doesn't happen again. The communication suite was very still. What, Yessa said carefully, do you think happened to us? I don't know, Marcus said. But something did. Something that scared you badly enough that you've spent 6 centuries building a system specifically designed to prevent it from ever happening again. And I think, he leaned forward, I think that whatever scared you is still scaring you. And I think that's why you haven't been fired yet. He was quiet for a moment. What was it? He asked. And Yessa Vorn, commander of the Convergence Fleet and veteran of 11 diplomatic campaigns and 3 active military engagements, sat in the silence of her own command deck and found, to her considerable alarm, that she was thinking about answering him honestly. She didn't. Not that day. But she thought about it for a long time after the channel closed. The thing Marcus Webb had identified, the fear threaded through the entire architecture of the Convergence like a structural nerve, invisible until you pressed exactly the right point, was not something Yessa had ever been asked about directly. It was not something Vale discussed even among themselves. It existed in their culture the way certain rooms exist in old houses, present, structurally necessary, never opened. Its name, in the original Vale resonance language, was a sound that translated loosely as the silence between the oldest stars. The Vale had not always been the dominant civilization in this region of space. Once, 640 years ago, they had been precisely what humanity is now, technologically adolescent, politically fractured, and biologically vulnerable. And once, 640 years ago, something had come through this region of space that looked at the Vale the way the Vale now looks at humanity, made a calculation and left without a word. The Vale had never found out what it was. They had found only what it had done. It had dismantled 2 of their colonies. Not destroyed, dismantled. The physical infrastructure was removed, atom by atom, with a precision that suggested not aggression but something more dispassionate. Something taxonomic. Like a researcher collecting specimens. The colonists were gone. No bodies. No wreckage. No signal. Just the outlines in the soil where the buildings had been and the asteroid fields where 2 small moons had once orbited, reduced to component materials and taken. The Vale had spent 600 years building a fence around the galaxy's neighborhood, ensuring that no civilization ever got powerful enough to do to the Vale what the Vale had once been helpless to prevent. And Marcus Webb, eating a turkey sandwich in a transmission suite on a Category 12 world, had put his finger on it in 9 hours. Marcus Webb had not been, by any standard metric, the obvious choice for humanity's diplomatic liaison to an alien fleet threatening orbital bombardment. He was, professionally speaking, a negotiator. He worked for a small, quietly influential organization called the Institute for Complex Conflict Resolution, which operated out of a nondescript building in Geneva and specialized in what its founder had called negotiations that everybody else has given up on. Hostage situations where the conventional playbook had failed. Labor disputes that had calcified into generational grudges. Civil conflicts where both sides had stopped being able to remember what the original disagreement was about but had become very attached to the conflict itself. Marcus was good at this because of a quality that was difficult to name precisely but that his colleagues described variously as pathological patience, aggressive empathy, and an unsettling ability to make people feel like he's on their side even when he's objectively not. His personal life was, by his own cheerful admission, a disaster. He was twice divorced, estranged from a daughter he was slowly rebuilding a relationship with, and lived in a Geneva apartment that contained almost no furniture because he was almost never there. He owned 4 excellent suits and approximately 11,000 books, most of them about the history of conflicts that had been resolved in ways nobody expected. He had a subscription to 3 different sandwich delivery services, which his assistant considered a character flaw and he considered efficient. He had been brought into the Alien Contact Response Protocol because the woman who had originally designed the protocol, Dr. Farah Osei, Earth's leading xenolinguist and the architect of humanity's first contact response strategy, had, upon receiving the Vale's first transmission, looked at the content, looked at the tone, looked at the specific structure of the ultimatum, and said something that had startled everyone in the room. She had said, "This isn't how you talk to someone you're planning to kill. This is how you talk to someone you're planning to talk to while pretending you're planning to kill them. Get me Marcus." Marcus had arrived 40 minutes later with a sandwich and had read the transmission file and had said, "Oh, interesting," in a tone that suggested he found the Vale's threatening ultimatum about as alarming as a mildly spicy crossword puzzle. "You're not scared," Dr. Osei had said, watching him. "I am," Marcus said, turning a page. But I'm more curious than scared, and when that happens I generally stop being very useful at being scared. He looked up. What do we know about what they're afraid of? That question, what are they afraid of, had driven every hour of Marcus's subsequent preparation. And now, on day 3 of his communication with Commander Jesse Vorn, it was driving the conversation toward something that none of the generals in their mountain bunkers had anticipated. I want to propose something, Marcus said on the 3rd day. And I want you to hear it before you respond because I think your first instinct will be to say no, and I think your second instinct, if you sit with it, might be more interesting. Jesse's bioluminescence was doing the thing Leth had started privately cataloging as the web pattern. A rhythmic fluctuation that happened specifically during Marcus's transmissions and nowhere else. He had mentioned this to her once. She had told him, with considerable firmness, to delete his notes. Speak, she said. I want to come aboard your ship. Leth made a sound behind her that she chose to ignore. You want to? Come aboard the Sovereign Hymn. In person. No weapons. No military escort. Just me. He paused. And maybe some sandwiches because honestly the food situation in this transmission suite has gotten grim. You would be surrendering yourself to us, Jesse said carefully. You understand that. I would be extending trust, Marcus corrected gently. Which is not the same thing even though it looks the same from the outside. He leaned forward. You've been in this solar system for 6 months. You haven't fired. I've been talking to you for 3 days. You haven't disconnected. I think we're both past the point of pretending this is a standard conquest scenario. Jesse was quiet for a long moment. And what do you believe would be accomplished by your physical presence on this vessel? She asked. Honestly? I don't know yet, Marcus said. But I've been doing this for 20 years and I've noticed that the conversations that matter, the ones that actually change something, almost never happen over a comm link. Something about being in the same room. Sharing air. He smiled. Even if your air is going to require me to wear a respirator. It will, Jesse confirmed. I assumed. He picked up his coffee. So, what do you think? Jesse thought about it for longer than she should have. She thought about the silence between the oldest stars. She thought about 600 years of fences. She thought about the 4 worlds that had cracked open, the 3rd one that hadn't, and the unremarkable blue-green planet below, which had responded to an extinction ultimatum by sending a man with a sandwich. Subcommander Leth will arrange the docking protocols, she said. Behind her, Leth made another sound. She continued to ignore it. The shuttle that carried Marcus Webb from Earth's surface to the Sovereign Hymn was a small diplomatic vessel, technically unarmed, practically uncomfortable, and piloted by a 26-year-old named Lieutenant Priya Anand who had volunteered for the mission by, in her words, making a decision before I could think about it too hard. She didn't speak much on the 4-hour journey. Marcus spent most of it reading a book about the Peloponnesian War, eating a granola bar, and occasionally looking out the viewport at the Sovereign Hymn as it grew from a distant light into something that rearranged his understanding of scale. The Vale flagship was not designed to impress. That was the first thing he registered and it surprised him. Human warships, even in this early age of human spacefaring, were built with a certain consciousness of their appearance. Clean lines, deliberate geometry, and the quiet visual rhetoric of power meant to be perceived. The Sovereign Hymn looked like something that had grown rather than been built. Its surface was irregular and asymmetrical, covered in structures that protruded and receded without obvious logic, and its color was the dark iridescent gray of a mussel shell in low light. It was, Marcus thought, genuinely beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they've stopped caring whether you find them beautiful. They're scanning us, Priya said quietly. I know, Marcus said. Are you scared? He considered the question with his usual thoroughness. Yes, he said. But it's the productive kind. The docking process was slow and extremely precise. 3 separate airlocks. A pressurization sequence that took 40 minutes. Marcus felt a resonance scan in his back teeth. And then the inner door opened, and the first thing he experienced aboard the Sovereign Hymn was the smell. He hadn't anticipated the smell. It was complex, mineral and warm and slightly electric, like the air after a thunderstorm filtered through a library. His respirator handled the atmospheric composition, but it couldn't filter everything. He stood in the airlock and breathed and thought, they've been living in this for 600 years. This is what 600 years smells like. Commander Jesse Vorn was waiting on the other side. She was taller than he'd imagined from the screen, nearly 7 feet, with a particular elongated grace of a species evolved for different gravity. Her scales were deep violet and copper, shifting as she moved in a way that Marcus now understood made her ambient emotional state visible. 4 eyes, each a slightly different shade of amber, looking at him with a particular quality of attention he recognized from the very best negotiators he'd ever faced across a table. Total, analytical, not unkind. She looked at him for a long moment. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. "People say that," Marcus agreed. "I find it very rude." Her bioluminescence did something quick and involuntary. He filed it under potential positive response to humor and did not allow himself to feel too encouraged. "Subcommander Leth will escort you to the conference space," Yessa said. "I have arranged," she paused almost imperceptibly, "a food preparation. Dr. Osei's cultural files indicated you would require regular sustenance." "That's very kind," Marcus said. He looked around the corridor, curved walls, bioluminescent strips, and the faint vibration of something vast and engineered humming beneath the floor. "This is an extraordinary ship. It is the finest vessel in the Convergence fleet," Yessa said, her voice flat, as if she were stating something she had known for so long that it had lost all meaning. "I believe that," Marcus said. And then carefully, "Is it also a home?" Yessa's scales shifted. "It has been my posting for 23 years. Do you have a word in your language for a place that's both a workplace and a home? Or have the two things become the same?" She looked at him with 2 of her 4 eyes. The other 2 were tracking something in his peripheral vision, he noticed. "Habitual threat assessment. We have a term. Belkareth. It translates loosely as the place whose loss you would not survive." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a beautiful word," he said. "And a very honest one." He followed Leth down the corridor and he thought, "Okay. Now I know what matters to her." The conference space was a room that felt, to Marcus, like being inside a thought. The walls were covered in what he initially took for decoration, complex layered patterns and bioluminescent pigment, shifting slowly over hours. Leth explained, with the careful neutrality of someone managing his discomfort at explaining something intimate to an outsider, that the patterns were a form of memory architecture, the veiled practice of encoding significant events and decisions into the physical spaces where they occurred, so that the room itself became a kind of accumulated record. "Every major diplomatic decision made on this ship is in these walls," Leth said. Marcus looked around slowly. "How long has this ship been active?" "The Sovereign Hymn was commissioned 212 years ago. So everything on these walls?" "It is 212 years of choices, yes." Marcus stood very still and looked at the walls for a long time. "Is there a record of the 4 destructions?" he asked. Leth's bioluminescence went very steady, the suppression pattern Marcus had learned, of strong emotion being controlled. "Yes," he said. "Can I ask which part of the wall?" Leth indicated a section near the floor at the far end of the room, low, almost hidden. The patterns there were darker than the rest, a deep violet that absorbed light rather than producing it. Marcus walked over and crouched down and looked at it. He stayed there for a long time. "Sub-Commander," he said quietly, not looking up, "how many of the crew were comfortable with those decisions?" A very long pause. "That is not," Leth stopped. Started again. "That is a question that has not been asked before." "That's not an answer," Marcus said gently. Another pause. "The 3rd destruction," Leth said very quietly, "produced what we call a resonance schism in the choir. 2 of the 7 refused to complete the threnody. They were removed from service." He paused. "The commander at the time recorded their refusal on the wall in the dark section. As a warning. Or as a memorial," Marcus said. Leth said nothing. Marcus stood up and turned around and found Yessa standing in the doorway watching him with all 4 eyes. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "The food preparation is ready," she said finally. "Thank you," Marcus said. And then, meeting her gaze, 2 of them refused. It was not a question. Yessa's scales shifted through 3 colors in quick succession. "You were not supposed to know that," she said. "I know," Marcus said. "I think it might be the most important thing I've learned today." Over the next 4 days aboard the Sovereign Hymn, Marcus Webb did something that no prior diplomatic contact with an alien civilization had managed to do, largely because no prior diplomatic contact with an alien civilization had involved Marcus Webb. He made friends. Not strategically. Not as a tactic. Or, more precisely, not only as a tactic. He was self-aware enough to know that every friendship he'd ever made in a professional context served some. The friendship had a dual purpose, but he was honest enough with himself to recognize that this did not make it any less real. He had been doing this work long enough to understand that the negotiator who draws a hard line between the personal and the professional generally produces agreements that fall apart in 18 months, because agreements are ultimately made between people, and people are not hard lines. He had long, careful conversations with Leth, who turned out to hold views about convergence policy that were considerably more complicated than his official function suggested. He spent an afternoon with the Sovereign Hymn's chief engineer, a Vale named Dessa whose 4 eyes sparkled with precisely the same quality of intellectual enthusiasm as every engineer Marcus had ever met, regardless of species. He sat in the ship's resonance garden, a room designed to produce the specific frequencies the Vale found emotionally restorative, and simply experienced it, which seemed to disconcert the 3 Vale technicians who were maintaining it and had never had a biological non-Vale simply sit in a corner and breathe in their maintenance space. And he talked to Yessa Vorn. He talked to her about the convergence. This section discusses the 14 systems, 9 civilizations, and the political structure that maintained relative stability across a vast region for 6 centuries. It was, he told her with complete sincerity, one of the most impressive political achievements he had ever studied. She looked at him with the expression of someone unsure whether the compliment was genuine. He talked to her about Earth. About the particular, improbable, chaotic miracle of a species that had nearly self-destructed several times and had built something out of that near miss that was less ordered than the convergence but perhaps more resilient for its disorder. She listened with the focused attention she gave everything, making no comment. Her bioluminescence was doing the web pattern that Leth had stopped cataloging but definitely still noticed. And on the 5th day he brought up the choir. "I've been thinking about what Leth told me," Marcus said. "About the 2 who refused." They were in the conference room. Yessa had, over the past several days, stopped standing at the formal end of the table and started sitting at the side nearest to him, which Marcus considered significant and did not mention. Leth should not have. He didn't mean to tell me. I asked the right question at the right moment. That's my fault, not his. He paused. Can I ask about the choir directly? Yessa was quiet for a moment. What do you want to know? How are they chosen? They are not chosen. They volunteer. Marcus tilted his head slightly. From what age? The vocal modification process begins at age 8 and continues for 30 years. So they volunteer at 8. Their families? Yessa stopped. Their families volunteer them, Marcus said, gently but precisely. Another silence. It is considered an honor, Yessa said. The highest service a Vale can render to the convergence. I understand that's how it's framed, Marcus said. I'm asking what the choir members themselves experience. Yessa's scales went through a slow, complex color shift that Marcus had started to associate with genuine discomfort rather than managed discomfort. The choir, she said carefully, are considered beyond standard experiential categories. Their modification process changes them so significantly that you've decided they're not subject to the same frameworks of experience as other Vale, Marcus said. Which is a very useful belief to hold if you need them to do something that would otherwise be impossible to ask. The room was hushed. You are, Yessa said, an uncomfortable person to talk to. I know, Marcus said. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be adversarial. I'm genuinely trying to understand. He paused. The 2 who refused the 3rd threnody. What happened to them? I told you. They were removed from service. And then? Yessa looked at him with all 4 eyes. They lived, she said, as though this was information that was simultaneously obvious and complicated. They were reassigned. They had secondary careers. They were, she paused, not harmed. But they were marked, Marcus said. Their refusal was recorded. Which in a culture where everything significant is written into the walls means they were marked permanently. He wasn't asking. Yes, Yessa said quietly. And yet they refused anyway. Yes. What were their names? Yessa looked at him for a long moment. Vel and Orith, she said. They are the only choir members in recorded history to have refused. Are they still alive? Vel died 14 years ago. Orith is, she paused, 106 years old. She lives in the capital system. She has not spoken publicly in 30 years. About the refusal? About anything. Her vocal modifications are permanent. The secondary career was, Yessa's scales shifted, administrative. Marcus sat with that for a moment. Then, what did they know? Vel and Orith. What did they see about that 3rd threnody that made them stop? Yessa said nothing. I think you know, Marcus said. I think it's something that's been in those walls for 80 years, in the dark section near the floor where no one has to look at it if they don't want to. And I think it's related to why you haven't been fired yet. Yessa's bioluminescence went completely still. He had seen this happen once before, when he'd mentioned the silence between the oldest stars by name, on day 2, and she'd asked how he knew about it. The stillness meant something beyond managed emotion. It meant she had hit the edge of the framework she used to understand her experience. The third world, she said finally, so quietly that his translator had to boost the gain to catch it. The Duru. She stopped. Started again. Their experiments. The ones the science board classified as destabilizing. What were they experimenting on? They were attempting to communicate with. Yessa stopped again. Her scales were very dark. With the silence. Marcus went very still. They had found something, Yessa said. In the residue of the 2 dismantled colonies, there is a significant amount of debris. A signal pattern. They were attempting to decode it. To respond to it. She looked at Marcus with an expression he had never seen on a Veil face before, something raw and frightened in a way that all the architectural control of convergence bearing couldn't quite hide. We did not know when we sent the choir that they were close to a response. Were they? Marcus asked carefully. Close. We don't know, Yessa said. We don't know because we destroyed the research before we examined it. We destroyed the world and then she stopped. Vel and Orith had been briefed. The science board briefed the choir before the Threnody as standard procedure. They were told what the Duru were researching. They understood what destroying that world meant. Her voice, her translated voice, carried something Marcus recognized from years of working with people who were carrying things they'd been carrying too long. They refused because they believed we were destroying our only chance to understand what took our colonies. The silence in the conference room was very different from the silences that had come before it. And the convergence destroyed the research anyway, Marcus said. Yes. Because understanding what took your colonies was less important than controlling who might have that understanding. Because, Yessa stopped. Started again. Stopped. Yes, she said finally. Yes. That is what it was. Marcus said nothing for a while. He looked at the dark section of the wall near the floor, Vel and Oritha's refusal, encoded in dark pigment for 80 years at the place where people were least likely to look. Caro, he said softly, a word he'd picked up on his 3rd day aboard, a veil expression meaning roughly, look at this. This right here. Pay attention to this spot specifically. He pointed at the dark section of wall. That's where this conversation actually started. 80 years ago. With 2 people who were willing to lose everything to say, stop. Look at what we're destroying. Yessa looked at the wall for a long time. Absymg, she said, from now on I can't go back to not knowing this, and Marcus thought it was possibly the most significant thing a Veil commander had said in 80 years. While Marcus was having conversations aboard the Sovereign him that nobody in the mountain bunkers had anticipated, humanity was doing what it does when it's scared and running out of time. Several different and mutually contradictory things are happening simultaneously. The political track was exactly what anyone familiar with human institutions would have predicted, fractious, urgent, occasionally brilliant, and frequently undermined by the fact that the people involved couldn't agree on basic facts about a situation none of them had any historical framework for. The United Nations Security Council had passed 4 resolutions in 6 months, 2 of which contradicted each other. 17 nations had unilaterally begun military preparations that ranged from practically useful to theoretically creative to deeply questionable. 3 different heads of state had given speeches declaring humanity's unwavering commitment to its survival, which everyone agreed with but which didn't constitute a plan. The scientific track was considerably more coherent, because scientists, unlike politicians, generally have a strong institutional preference for not dying over whatever disagreement they were having before the extinction level event arrived. Dr. Farah Osei was coordinating this track from a facility in Iceland that had been, before the contact event, a geothermal research station and had been, since the contact event, the most information-dense room on Earth. She had assembled the best minds humanity had available in xenolinguistics, astrophysics, conflict theory, behavioral biology, and 7 other disciplines that had never previously needed to coordinate, and she was running them the way a conductor runs an orchestra, with absolute authority, minimal explanation, and the unspoken understanding that everyone in the room was there because they were the best at what they did and had agreed to temporarily stop arguing about everything else. She was also, quietly, running a separate track that she had not briefed to any government. This track had begun when she had read Vale's original transmission cautiously and had noticed something that she had not mentioned to anyone except Marcus. The Vale's ultimatum contained, embedded in its formal diplomatic structure, a request. Not in the text. It is not included in any layer of the official communication. But in the resonance pattern of the transmission itself, the Vale communicated in layered frequencies, the way humans use tone and emphasis as a secondary communication channel alongside language. Farah had spent 3 months building a model of how that resonance layer worked, and when she ran the original ultimatum through the model, she found something that made her sit down heavily and stare at her screen for a very long time. The resonance layer of the ultimatum said, in a pattern she translated as roughly equivalent to, "We are here and we are afraid, and we need something we do not know how to ask for." She had sent Marcus aboard the Sovereign him knowing this. She had not told him because Marcus worked best when he was working from genuine intuition rather than a briefing. But she had asked him to listen for fear because she knew the fear was there. Now, 6 days into his presence aboard the Vale flagship, she was receiving his nightly data transmissions. Not reports because Marcus didn't write reports. He sent stream of consciousness voice recordings that his assistant transcribed into documents that were simultaneously illuminating and infuriating, and she was building a picture of something that she was not yet ready to name, because naming it would mean she had to act on it, and acting on it would require doing something that she was not sure humanity was prepared to do. On the 6th night of Marcus's stay aboard the Sovereign him, she opened a private channel to him and said, "Marcus, the Duru research. Do we know what they found?" A long pause. Then, "How do you know about the Duru research?" "Because I've been reading the resonance layer of every Vale transmission for 6 months, and there's a pattern in it that I've been calling the old fear, and I think the old fear is about whatever the Duru were looking for." Another pause. "Farah," Marcus said quietly, "I think the Duru found a signal from whatever took the Vale colonies. And I think the signal is still there. And I think, this is the part where I need you to not react yet, just hear it, I think we might be able to find it." Farah was quiet for a long moment. "HFY," she said softly. "From now on I can't pretend I didn't hear that." "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's about where I am too." It took Dr. Farah Osei 11 days to find it. This was remarkable, given that they were looking for a signal in an area of space that was 600 years old, using instruments designed for an entirely different purpose, guided by partial information extracted from the resonance layer subtext of a series of ultimatum transmissions. It was the kind of task that, laid out as a formal research proposal, would have been rejected by any funding committee in human history on the grounds of being unreasonable. They found it anyway because Farah had assembled a team of people who were constitutionally incapable of deciding something was unreasonable until they tried it, and because Dr. Chinwei, who had been working on deep space signal analysis for 20 years, had an intuition about the frequency band that turned out to be correct in a way that he would spend the rest of his life being unable to fully explain. The signal was not what any of them expected. They had expected something alien. Something with a frequency or format or structure that would require months or years of analysis to begin to decode. They had expected the problem to be one of comprehension. How do you understand something built by a mind that works in a completely different way? The problem was not comprehension. The problem was that the signal was simple. Devastatingly, almost insultingly simple. It was a repeating sequence of mathematical primes, overlaid with a harmonic pattern that resolved, when Chin ran it through a standard acoustic visualization, into something that looked disturbingly like a map. A map of this region of space with markers at 17 points. 16 of the markers were at the locations of known civilizations, past and present, within the convergence's sphere of influence. The 17th marker was at Seoul. "They know we're here," Chin said in a voice carefully drained of all inflection. "They've always known," Farah said, not looking up from her screen. "The question is what the map is for." She stared at the data for a long time. "It's not a threat map," she said finally. "The structure is wrong for threat assessment. The markers aren't ranked or prioritized. They're annotated." She pulled up the harmonic overlay. "Each marker has there's a resonance signature attached to each one. Like a label." She ran the signature for the Seoul marker through her model. She went very still. "What does it say?" Chin asked. "I need Marcus," she said. She called him within the hour. "The signal has a label attached to each marked civilization," she told him. 16 civilizations in Earth. "And the label attached to Earth." She stopped. "Marcus, the label attached to Earth reads as approximately candidate for continuation." A very long pause. "And the others?" Marcus said. 15 of the 16 are labeled integrated. One, she stopped again. One is labeled discontinued. "Which one?" "The Vale's home system," Farah said. "The original home system before they became the convergence. Before the colonies were taken." The silence over the channel was complete and absolute. "Farah," Marcus said slowly, "I think we need to tell Yessa." "I know," Farah said. "I've been sitting here for an hour trying to think of a reason not to, and I can't find one that I can live with." The word integrated. I know. The 14 systems. The 9 civilizations under convergence governance. The way the convergence spreads. I know, Marcus. The thing that took the colonies didn't take them, Marcus said. It changed them. And then it put them to work, Farah said quietly. Building something. Something that looks from the outside like an empire. But isn't it? Another silence. And we're the new candidate, Marcus said. Not quite, Farah said. The label on Earth is different from the others. More complex. The harmonic signature attached to our marker is unlike any of the others. I've been trying to decode it for 3 hours. She paused. The closest translation I can get is, she stopped. Marcus, the closest translation is unexpected variable. Marcus was quiet for a long time. That, he said, is either very good news or very bad news. I know, Farah said. I think we need more information. I think, Marcus said slowly, that we need to do something that's going to be very difficult to propose to a Veil commander who has spent her entire career building a system specifically designed to prevent the thing I'm about to suggest. Which is? Answer the signal, Marcus said. Marcus asked to speak to Yessa alone. This was, by this point in his stay aboard the Sovereign Him, no longer an unusual request. Leth supervised their meetings from an adjacent room, officially for security protocol, unofficially because he had realized 3 days in that excluding himself entirely would produce more diplomatic progress, and his job, ultimately, was to support diplomatic progress even when it made him deeply uncomfortable. Yessa was standing at the observation viewport when Marcus arrived, looking at the blue-green planet below with an expression that, over the past 11 days, he had learned to read as something she wouldn't have allowed him to read in the first week. "You've found something," she said without turning. "Yes." "About the silence." "Yes." He moved to stand beside her at the viewport. "I need to show you data, and then I need to tell you something that I think is going to be one of the hardest things I've ever said to anyone. And I need you to hear all of it before you respond." She turned and looked at him with all 4 eyes. "Show me," she said. He spent an hour walking her through everything, the signal, the map, the markers and the labels. He kept his voice even and his explanations careful, because he had learned that Yessa processed information best when it was given in complete, organized form rather than built to a rhetorical conclusion. She asked precise, intelligent questions at each stage. Her bioluminescence cycled through colors he hadn't seen before. When he reached the final piece, the label on Veil's home system, discontinued, and the unexpected variable designation on Earth, she was very still. "The convergence," she said. Her voice was controlled in a way that required visible effort. "You're telling me the convergence was?" "I'm telling you what the data suggests," Marcus said carefully. "I'm not telling you what it means. I don't know what it means. I'm not sure meaning is even the right frame for something this old and this, whatever it is. It was built," Yessa said. "The convergence, what we built, was consistent with what something wanted," Marcus said. "That's all I know. I don't know if consistent with means caused by. I don't know if there was intent in any sense we'd recognize. The entity, the silence, has been operating on timescales we can barely model. I genuinely don't know if what happened to your colony 600 years ago was deliberate engineering or something more." He paused. "Ecological." Yessa was silent for a long time. "The Duru," she said finally. "They were close to this." "Yes." "And we?" "Yes." She walked away from the viewport and stood in the center of the room, and her bioluminescence did something Marcus had never seen. A full-body flicker cycling through a spectrum of colors in rapid succession, like a system restarting. He stayed very still and allowed her the space to do whatever this was. After 2 minutes it stopped. She stood with her scales at a deep, even blue, a color he had not seen on her before. "What did you say was the label on Earth?" she asked. "Unexpected variable," Marcus said. "Which Farah, Dr. Osei, has been trying to decode more fully, and her current best translation is," he paused, "something like the thing that doesn't fit the pattern we expected." Yessa looked at him. "You," she said slowly, "came aboard this ship and sat in this conference room and did not behave in any of the ways we anticipated. I've been told that's a personal failing," Marcus said. "No," Yessa said. Something in her voice had shifted, not softer exactly but differently textured. More direct. "We have made contact with 47 civilizations. We have modeled the behavioral parameters of intelligent life extensively. Every civilization we have encountered, when faced with an extinction-level threat, responds in one of 6 documented patterns." She paused. "You did not respond in any of them. You sent a choir-level ultimatum," Marcus said. We sent a man with a sandwich. Yes, Yessa said. Caro, look at this. This specifically. She used the word in a way Marcus hadn't heard before, turned inward rather than outward, pointing at something in herself. I did not know what to do with you. She stopped. I still do not know what to do with you. I know, Marcus said. I think that might be the point. She looked at him sharply. The silence labels you as an unexpected variable, he said. It labeled your home system as discontinued. 600 years ago, it changed the trajectory of your civilization in a way that built something remarkable and terrible and apparently part of a pattern you didn't consent to. He paused. And now it's looking at Earth and whatever it is, intelligence, ecological force, something we don't have a category for, it has called us unexpected. He walked to the viewport and looked at the blue-green planet. I think we should answer the signal, he said. Not because I know what answering means. Not because I'm certain it's safe. But because the alternative is, he paused. The alternative is what Vale did for 600 years. Build a fence. Make everything controllable. Destroy Duru's research because it is uncontrollable. He turned. And we've seen where that goes. Yessa stood very still. You are proposing, she said carefully, that the Vale Convergence, which has spent 600 years building a structure specifically designed to prevent contact with the silence, and the human civilization, which has been in contact with extraterrestrial intelligence for approximately 11 days, jointly compose and transmit a response to a signal from an entity that may have been shaping both of our civilizations for centuries. Yes, Marcus said. A very long pause. Give me 12 hours, Yessa said. Yessa did not sleep during those 12 hours. She walked the sovereign hymn from bow to stern and back again, a walk she had taken in states of stress or uncertainty or grief or decision throughout 23 years of this ship being her Velcareth, her place whose loss she would not survive, and she thought about the dark section of wall in the conference room and Vel and Orith, and the third Threnody, and the Duru's research burning in the ruins of a cracked open world. She thought about 14 systems and 9 civilizations and the 600 years of careful, deliberate, exhausting work of holding everything in its designated place, preventing the uncontrollable variable, maintaining the structure that was supposed to guarantee. What? She stopped walking. She was in the resonance garden. It was 3 in the morning ship time and the garden was empty, and the frequencies moved through her the way they always had, the particular vibration that, in Vale experience, corresponded to what humans called peace, and that the Vale called something that translated more accurately as the felt sense that what is happening is exactly what should be happening. She had not felt that in the resonance garden in, she tried to remember, years. She had stood here in ritual practice, performed the meditative postures, breathed the right frequencies, and felt nothing but the absence of peace dressed in the shape of peace. She felt it now. Standing in the dark garden, in the middle of the night, after a human had told her that everything the Convergence had built was possibly a pattern she hadn't consented to. She sat down on the floor of the garden, which was not something Vale commanders did in their own resonant gardens, and she stayed there for a long time, she thought. She thought about the Duru. Not as a policy decision. Not as a necessary action for Convergence stability. She thought about the world that had been, and the research that had been, and the 2 choir members who had stood in front of a planet and refused, and she thought about what those 2 people had understood that their commanders hadn't. They had understood that the thing you're most afraid of looking at directly is usually the thing you most need to look at straight away. She thought about Vel and Orith, marked in dark pigment at the base of the conference room wall for 80 years. She had known those names since her posting to the sovereign hymn. She had stood in that room hundreds of times and never once voluntarily walked to that section of the wall and looked at it. And the first thing Marcus Webb had done in the first hour of his first day aboard the ship was walk straight to it and crouch down and look. HFY. From now on I can't go back to not knowing this. She had said those words without understanding she was saying something irreversible. She thought about the silence. Not as a threat. For the first time in her life she tried to think about it as a thing that existed independently of the Convergence's fear of it. An entity, an ecological force, or a process that had been moving through this region of space for what might be millions of years and had done something to her civilization that she had spent 23 years helping to obscure the memory of. And that had looked at a small, fragile, bewilderingly chaotic species on a blue-green world and called them unexpected. She thought about what it meant that of all the civilizations in the signal map, only Earth was labeled differently. She thought about the fact that Earth had, when threatened with extinction, sent a man with a sandwich who had spent 3 days asking everyone what they were afraid of. And she thought about the fact that she was sitting on the floor of a resonance garden at 3 in the morning feeling something she had not felt in years, because a human had told her the truth. She went to find Marcus. He was awake, which did not surprise her. He was in the small quarters that had been assigned to him, sitting at the desk, surrounded by several objects she had come to recognize as his working environment. The ceramic mug, a battered notebook, 3 or 4 books, and an assortment of food wrappers. He was writing something. He looked up when she came in without knocking, and he read her expression with the speed and accuracy she had come to expect from him, and he put down his pen. "You've decided?" he said. "Yes," she said. She sat down across from him. "But I need to know something first." "Okay. If we answer this signal, if we make contact with the silence, you understand that we do not know what it is. We do not know what it wants. We do not know whether contact will be," she paused, "survivable." "Yes," Marcus said. "I know. And your recommendation is still to proceed." "My recommendation is that the alternative is what's actually unsurvivable," Marcus said carefully. "Not immediately. Not dramatically. But, you've been building a structure around a fear for 600 years. And the structure has become the focus. The convergence isn't protecting anyone from the silence anymore. The convergence stands as a testament to the fear of the silence, influencing every decision it makes. Eventually," he paused. "Eventually a structure built around fear collapses inward. I've seen it happen. At a much smaller scale. With humans. But the mechanism is the same." Yessa was quiet. "What I'm proposing," Marcus said, "isn't bravery. It's not heroics. It's trying something different, making a choice not driven by fear." He paused. "And I think, this is the part one can't prove, but I believe it, I think the fact that Earth is labeled unexpected matters. I think whatever the silence is, it has a pattern it runs on, and we don't fit the pattern, and that might be precisely why we're the right ones to try this." Yessa looked at him for a long moment. "The human who was voted least likely to follow standard procedure," she said. "That's me," Marcus agreed. "Caro," she said softly, "look at this specifically," and this time he understood she was pointing at him. "At this particular unlikely human in this particular unlikely moment. You know what you are? You are the thing that the model doesn't account for." "Story of my life," Marcus said. "That is," Yessa said, "possibly the most important thing either of our civilizations has produced." What followed was 6 days of the strangest collaborative work in the history of either civilization. Marcus and Yessa, with Farah's team on the ground and Leth's deeply reluctant but ultimately invaluable assistance, attempted to compose a response to a signal that was 600 years old, from an entity they didn't understand in a language they were building from scratch. This was, objectively, an impossible task. They did it anyway. The first decision they made was that the response would not be primarily mathematical. This was controversial. Chin Wei, on the ground team, argued forcefully that mathematics was the only truly universal language and that anything beyond basic mathematical structures risked introducing noise, misinterpretation, and catastrophic miscommunication. Farah had listened to this argument for an hour and then said, "Chin, the original signal was mathematical. It was a map. It was information. If all we send back is more information, we're not communicating, we're confirming receipt. That's not a conversation." "We don't know that it wants a conversation," Chin had said. "We don't know that it doesn't," Farah had said. "And the choice not to try having one is itself a form of communication. It says, we're incapable of this, and I don't want that to be the thing we say." Chin had been quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you want to say?" Farah had thought about it for a long time. "I want to say something true," she had said finally. "Something that isn't just information. Something that couldn't have been predicted by any model." Which was how they had arrived at the thing Marcus called, somewhat awkwardly, the emotional layer. The veil communicated in resonance frequencies that carried emotional and contextual information alongside linguistic content. This was not metaphorical, it was a physiological reality of their communication system, the evolutionary equivalent of the human capacity for tone and facial expression, but far more precise and far more information-dense. Farah had been modeling it for 6 months. Marcus had been learning to perceive it for 11 days via a sensory interface that Dessa, the engineer, had built for him. A small device that translated the resonance patterns into something his auditory cortex could process as a kind of harmonic overtone. It was inexact and approximate and frequently disorienting, but it gave him something to work with. The response they composed was built in 3 layers. The first layer was mathematical, confirmation of reception, acknowledgement of the map, the 17 markers and the labels. This was Chen's layer. It was precise and clean and spoke the language the signal had been sent in. The second layer was the resonance layer, built in the Veil's native frequency architecture but modified, extended, and opened up in ways that Yessa said, with a mixture of discomfort and something approaching wonder, had never been attempted in Veil communication. The resonance layer carried what the team agreed to call the fact of us. Not information about humanity or the Veil, but the felt sense of two civilizations sitting in a room together trying to figure out how to say something true to something vast and unknown. The effort itself was audible. The fear and the curiosity and the 600-year-old grief and the 11-day-old connection and everything that had happened in the conference room on the Sovereign Hymn over 2 weeks translated into frequency. Yessa had sat with the resonance layer for a long time before she had said, "This is the most honest thing the Veil have transmitted in 600 years. Is that good or bad?" Marcus had asked. "I don't know yet," she had said. "But it is true." The third layer was Marcus's contribution, and it was the most contentious. He wanted to include laughter. Not human laughter specifically. This is not a recording of a laugh track. But the concept of it, the thing he'd been thinking about since day one, since the Sovereign Hymn's crew had first encountered his transmissions and been unable to classify his humor. The involuntary respiratory convulsion produced by the recognition of an incongruity between expected and actual outcomes. The physical, uncontrollable response to the gap between what should be and what is. "It's the most uniqueliest thing I can think of," he told Yessa. "Not human specifically. Thinking things. Things that have a model of how the world works and then notice when the world doesn't match the model and find it, somehow, not threatening. Find it, in fact, enjoyable." "The silence may not have a framework for understanding that response," Leth said in the tone he used for things he was pretty sure were a terrible idea but had stopped trying to argue about. "I know," Marcus said. "That might be exactly the point." "Explain," Yessa said. "We're labeled as unexpected variables," Marcus said. "We're the thing that doesn't fit the model. I think the most honest, most distinctliest thing we can send is evidence of exactly that, evidence that we're capable of looking at the gap between expected and actual and finding it, of all things, funny." He paused. "I think that's what unexpected means. I think that's what he caught himself, noticed. Not our technology. Not our military capacity. Not our political structure. The fact that we can laugh." There was a long silence in the room. "UBSYMJHY, Yessa said softly. "Yeah," Marcus said. "UBSYMJHY. They sent it on a Tuesday. This was not planned symbolically. It was just the day the composition was finished, and the day that Chen's team confirmed the transmission parameters, and the day that Marcus had gotten enough sleep to feel like a functioning human being for the first time in 3 weeks. Priya, still aboard the Sovereign Hymn, where she had become, over 3 weeks, a peculiar and well-liked fixture, noted that it was a Tuesday and said, "Tuesdays are good days for impossible things," and nobody contradicted her. The transmission took 47 minutes to complete. Marcus sat in the conference room during the transmission. Yessa stood at the observation viewport. Leth monitored the technical parameters from the adjacent room with the expression of someone who has made peace with the fact that he works for someone who does inexplicable things and has decided that this is his life now. Dessa watched the energy readings with the focused, bright-eyed attention of an engineer watching something work the way it was supposed to work. The resonance layer built slowly, the way the Veil's deepest communications always did, accumulating frequency by frequency, layer by layer, until the full texture of what they were trying to say was present in the transmission in its complete form. Yessa's bioluminescence, visible to Marcus through the doorway, was doing something he had never seen before. A slow, steady, even pulse of deep blue gold that she had told him, when he'd asked about the color combination, corresponded to doing something that is frightening and necessary, and you cannot know yet whether it was right. The third layer came last. The humor layer, which Marcus and Dessa's unlikely collaboration had rendered in a frequency band that translated the concept of incongruity recognition as pleasure into Veil resonance terms as best as they could manage. It wasn't perfect. Marcus didn't expect it to be perfect. He expected it to be true, which was different. When the transmission ended, the Sovereign Hymn was hushed. "Now we wait," Yessa said. "Yes," Marcus said. He picked up his coffee. "How long do you think?" Leth asked from the doorway. "I have no idea," Marcus said. "Historically," Leth said in the tone of someone who knows what they're about to say is absurd and is saying it anyway, the convergence's models suggest that response latency from a civilization operating on million-year timescales. "Leth," Marcus said. "Yes. I don't think our models are very useful here." Pause. "No," Leth agreed. "I suppose not." Marcus drank his coffee. Yessa stood at the viewport. The blue-green planet turned slowly below them, indifferent to the fact that two of its species' most improbable representatives had just sent a message into an old dark on its behalf. Outside, the stars were very still. The response came in 6 hours. This was not what any model predicted. 6 hours when they had been bracing for years, decades, for the possibility of nothing at all. 6 hours, and then something lit up on Chen's instruments at the ground station in Iceland, and Farah's voice came over the channel, and she was not speaking in the measured, careful register she used for professional communications. She was crying. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had the texture of someone trying to hold something enormous in their hands. "Marcus," it responded. "What does it say?" he asked. His voice was very quiet. A long pause. He could hear her breathing, the low hum of her instruments, and Chen saying something inaudible in the background. "It's complex," she said. "The mathematical layer it's adding to the map, Marcus. There are new markers. New labels." She paused. "The resonance layer, I'm still processing it. Her voice broke slightly. "It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's not in Veil frequency architecture, it's in something older. Something that," she stopped. Started again. "I need more time for the resonance layer." "And the third layer?" Marcus asked. "The humor layer?" A very long pause. "Marcus," Farah said. It sent back a response to the third layer. Another pause. "And I've been doing this for 30 years. I've spent 30 years on language and communication and signal analysis. And she stopped. "What is it?" Marcus said. "It's a joke," Farah said. "Or something that is functionally equivalent to a joke. Something that is structured like, here is the expected thing, here is the actual thing, here is the gap between them. She laughed, a sound that was slightly wild. "Marcus, it's funny. It's genuinely funny. I don't fully understand it yet, but the structure, it's definitely humor. It's Caro. Look at this. This specifically. An entity that has been operating on million-year timescales just made a joke back at us." Marcus sat in the conference room of the Sovereign Hymn and looked at the dark section of wall near the floor, where Vel and Oritha's refusal was encoded in deep violet pigment, and he laughed. He laughed for a while, the way you laugh when you've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and something finally shifts, and the laughter is not happiness exactly but is the physical expression of a kind of relief that doesn't have another word. Yessa came into the room and stood very still, watching him laugh. "It responded," she said. "It responded," Marcus confirmed. He wiped his eyes. "And it made a joke." Yessa was quiet for a moment. Her scales were shimmering deep blue and gold again. "I did not know," she said slowly, "that this was a possible outcome." "I know," Marcus said. "Neither did I." He looked at her. "HFY." Her bioluminescence flickered, the involuntary, unmanaged flicker that he had started privately cataloging as genuine emotion overriding professional control and considered, in all honesty, one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen. "HFY," she said. What came after was not simple. Nothing that mattered was ever simple. Marcus had learned this so thoroughly over 20 years of work that it had stopped being a lesson and become a kind of atmospheric fact. The thing you breathed without noticing, the thing that shaped everything without announcing itself. The complicated, provisional, ongoing nature of anything worth doing. The Veil convergence did not, in the months following the transmission, simply transform into a different political entity. 600 years of institutional structure, architecture of fear, and policy built on the management of uncontrollable variables. These things don't dissolve overnight because a commander sat on the floor of a resonance garden and had a realization. They are worked through slowly and unevenly, with significant resistance from the people whose identity and security are wrapped up in the existing system. Leth, who had spent 3 weeks being deeply uncomfortable about everything Marcus did, produced for months later, a policy document that Yessa described privately as the most quietly revolutionary thing the Convergence Science Board has received in a century. It proposed, among other things, a formal review of the 4 Threnody actions, a reclassification of the choir's institutional status, and, most radically, a proposal to reconstruct, from surviving secondary sources, as much of the Duru's research as possible. It passed. Not unanimously. This process was not without significant opposition, negotiated compromise, and all the tedious, necessary machinery of political change. But it passed. Orith, the surviving choir member who had refused the third threnody and been silent for 30 years, was contacted by a representative of Yessa's diplomatic office. The representative reported back that Orith had listened to the account of the transmission and its response for 3 hours without speaking and then had said a single sentence. The representative had written it down carefully because she felt it was important. I told them the world was listening back. The conference room on the sovereign hymn was not changed. Yessa chose not to update the wall, not to add new patterns over the existing ones, not to relocate the dark section near the floor. She chose instead to change the lighting, a small, specific light source placed to illuminate that section. So it was no longer the thing you had to cross the room to see. So it was visible from the door. She never explained this decision to anyone and nobody asked. The response from the silence continued to be decoded over the following years. It was long. Longer than any single document or database humanity had ever produced. The mathematical layer alone contained data that rearranged in fundamental ways human and Veil understanding of the structure of this region of space, stellar cartography, temporal models, and information about 17 civilizations across several 100,000 years that rewrote the history of the galactic neighborhood in ways that were sometimes staggering and sometimes heartbreaking, and always, in Ferris telling of it to her graduate students, exactly as complicated as you would expect a true thing to be. The resonance layer took 11 years to fully decode. What it contained was debated for decades afterward. Not because the content was ambiguous but because its implications were vast enough that reasonable people could spend a lifetime deciding what to do with it. The broad outline was agreed upon relatively quickly. It was a kind of accounting. A record. Not a mission statement or a manifesto or a moral framework, but something more dispassionate and more honest. A documentation of what had happened to 17 civilizations over a very long time, including what had been done to them and why, and what had been learned. What had been learned, as best as Farah's team could translate, was something like, the managed thing does not grow. The unexpected thing does. A section of the resonance layer specifically addressed Duru's destruction, taking 3 years to decode, and Farah did not release it publicly for another 2 years while she sat with what it said. When she did release it, she did so without commentary. What it said, translated as accurately as she could manage, was, that was a loss. Not a condemnation. Not a judgment. A statement of fact from something that operated on million-year timescales and had been watching carefully enough to know. That was a loss. The humor layer continued to be the subject of significant academic disagreement about whether what had been sent back genuinely constituted humor or was simply a structurally similar pattern that humans and Veil were anthropomorphizing due to wishful thinking. Marcus Webb, when asked about this debate in the 3rd year after the transmission, in an interview conducted in his Geneva apartment, slightly more furniture now, he had acquired a couch and a lamp and a second bookshelf, said, I've been in rooms with some of the most analytically rigorous minds on this planet for 3 years arguing about whether an entity operating on million-year timescales made a joke back at us. And every time I'm in one of those rooms I feel, he paused, smiling slightly, I feel like whatever it is, it's enjoying this. The interviewer had asked if he could elaborate. No, Marcus had said cheerfully. I really can't. That's the point. He went back to the sovereign hymn twice more in the 3 years following the transmission. The second visit was for the formal establishment of the Joint Veil Human Communication Initiative, a diplomatic and scientific collaboration that was, in the understated language of its founding charter, unprecedented in the history of either civilization, and that was, in the personal experience of everyone involved, something between a miracle and an ongoing argument that both sides found, on balance, worthwhile. The third visit was personal. He didn't file a report on the third visit. He went with a small bag and his books and an extraordinary number of sandwiches. Dessa had learned to replicate sourdough bread, which Marcus considered one of the more significant cultural exchanges of the initiative, and he spent 2 weeks on the sovereign hymn having conversations that were not about policy or protocol or the ongoing work of translating something vast and old into something usable. He spent 2 weeks in the resonance garden, learning to sit still in frequencies that were not designed for his nervous system but that he had been sitting in long enough that they had become, he thought, a kind of home. He spent 2 weeks in the conference room, looking at the illuminated section of wall where Vel and Ortha's refusal was encoded, and thinking about the Duru's research burning in the ruins, and thinking about what it cost to refuse and what it cost not to. He spent 2 weeks in conversation with Yessa Vorn that ranged over 15 evenings across the history of 2 civilizations and the nature of fear and the question of what the silence was, exactly, intelligence or process, entity or ecology, something that wanted things or something that simply was, and always came back, in the end, to the same unresolved and apparently inexhaustible territory. What do you think it is? Yessa asked him on the last evening as the sovereign hymn moved through a stellar neighborhood that looked, on the new maps, very different from how it had looked 6 months ago. I think, Marcus said slowly, it's whatever caused the first living thing to do the first unexpected thing. The force behind the gap between what should be and what is. He paused. I think it's old enough that it has stopped distinguishing between those two things. Old enough that for it, what should be and what is are the same. He paused again. I think that's why it was interested in us. We still think they're different. We still find the gap funny. Yessa was quiet for a moment. Is that, she started? I don't know if it's good, Marcus said. I genuinely don't know. It might mean we're young and noisy and going to grow out of it. Or it might mean, he stopped, looked at the stars. Or it might mean it's the most important thing about us. We can examine the difference between our expectations and what actually occurred without collapsing into fear. Not build 600 years of architecture around managing the gap. He paused. Just laugh. And try again. Yessa's bioluminescence glowed deep blue and gold. HFY, she said quietly. Yeah, Marcus said. HFY. They sat together in the observation room of the Sovereign Hymn, two representatives of two civilizations that had, through a process neither of them had planned and that both of them were still working out the implications of, done something that the silence between the oldest stars had apparently been waiting a very long time to see. Outside, in the direction of the oldest stars, the dark held things that were still becoming known. Carol, look at this. This right here. This is what happened when the thing that didn't fit the model sent someone with a sandwich. Indy.